Hi everyone, how are you doing today? I'm Junior. As you may have noticed when you clicked on the name of the video and presumably started watching this with the intent, we are going to be recapping uh, the entire series of One Piece, and I figure by the time I get to the end, it might be over. Uh, but now that I've said that out loud, I'm losing confidence in that fact. So, as a forewarning and a spoiler, this series and all of my videos in it have the potential to spoil any moment of One Piece. These are recaps, but from the perspective of someone who has an intimate knowledge of the show. So what that means is that I may reference things you don't understand. I'm gonna try and keep that to a minimum and just cover what happens in the actual episodes. Um, but there will be moments where I want to just point out moments where Oda uh, set something up very cool. Also, we're gonna try and keep it for the most part family friendly. So, I'm gonna try and hold back on all the nay words. Also, I want to dive right into the first episode. I'm gonna be trying to do about 4 episodes of video, so hopefully these don't go too long. My notes aren't expansive, as watching these is a terribly slow process here in Japan. If I want English subtitles. So, episode 1, we face the beginning of it all, way back in the before times when the animation was really, really bad. And I have to say, if we're gonna start talking about recapping One Piece, uh, and just going over episode by episode, a little bit of what happens in each episode, and just things I like and how it will flows into the rest of the story. We have to talk about the opening theme songs. Now, when I watch anime, I tend to skip opening themes because I find they spoil things about the show. One Piece is brutally responsible for part of my fears about this. As every different theme song they've had, for the most part, has spoiled something. Not all of them, and some of the ones that don't spoil things are some of my personal favorites. However, some of the ones that do spoil things are also in that top tier category. And if we're going to talk One Piece, we have to talk about the first theme song, which recently made a return for episode 1000, which is We Are. It is a classic. It's upbeat, it's beautiful, and it really, really spoils the entire first saga of One Piece. The first 60 odd episodes just is like there is like a scene from each from in that episode from every part of the whole saga in that opening cutscene. That opening uh cinematic. Why can I think of what it's called? It's just an anime opening, right? But We Are is a beautiful piece of music that, in many ways, I feel encapsulates the One Piece spirit. Because we are on the cruise. But it's all about dreams and ambition. And that's very much what One Piece is about. And right away, we get the opening line of the show with the declaration of the title, um, which is like kind of a spoiler for the rest of the series, which is just I'm going to be king of the pirates. And honestly, if Luffy at the end of the story isn't considered king of the pirates, I don't. I think there'll be a riot. Because the whole point of this story is that that's going to happen. Um, and we have this beautiful old animation style with the still backgrounds a lot of the time. Some real janky emotes from the people. It's very great. Um, we know that the story is going to revolve around pirates, but Oda introduces to us through Alvida, with her hot pink ship and massive female captain with a giant club, and just immediately is breaking our expectations on what a pirate might be. There is a real difference between a One Piece pirate and a real life pirate, and Oda wastes no time in forcing us to suspend disbelief and really bringing home that there's a lot of this show that's going to be a comedy. We get one man getting hit in the gonads. We get the bright pink ship that looks silly as all heck. And then we get the introduction of Luffy, which, you know, is just if you're gonna take parody and comedy and dial it up to 11, you have a little crazy boy made of rubber, who just it seems to be stronger than everyone around him, but acts like he doesn't pay any attention to anything. Which is great. And before we're introduced to Luffy, we are introduced to Kobe, who when I was a kid I hated a lot like Luffy. I felt that he was just a big coward and kind of dumb. Now as an adult, I think he's a big coward and kind of dumb, but in a good way, you know. And we need to pay attention to Kobe because Oda, the creator of One Piece and the writer, really loves his characters. And he has over 20 years now worth of them. So he really likes to use them. And if you don't like Kobe, hopefully that'll change because he's gonna come back. But the whole first episode of One Piece is really to set up for the audience. I feel Luffy's character and what he represents. Because basically, the whole through line of the episode is there's a ship. Nami is on the ship. We don't know who Nami is, but the camera seems to focus on her a lot. We see her stealing money from Alvida and whatnot. We know she's a player, and she's in the opening theme, but we don't know who she is yet, which is actually kind of good. If you're watching the opening and being spoiled, then you know she's someone important to the series, but you don't know how that's going to happen yet. Basically, the ship that Nami is on gets attacked by Alvida. And that's where we're introduced to Kobe, a small, scrawny boy, unlike anyone else in the show, with an oversized head. And through all of this, he meets Luffy, a young boy who is in a barrel, who is declared that he is going to be king of the pirates. Um, and that his ship got sucked up by a whirlpool, and he jumped in a barrel to try and survive it, and just happened to get onto this ship somehow through sheer happenstance. And basically, there's this moment where Kobe is just really cowardly. And we get this moment where Luffy is laughing and insulting Kobe. But not in a mean way, he's just saying how Kobe makes him feel and think. Which is kind of innocent, right? Like, there's a lot about Luffy that's very childlike in this episode. And then there are some very beautiful moments that aren't. Like when Kobe has an actual panic attack. When Luffy says he's going to be king of the pirates with all the conviction of a man with a loaded gun to his head. Um, and it's a very clear, stark contrast in Luffy's character that Oda wanted to set up immediately for us. And this is a character who will either at the end of this story be the king of the pirates or be dead. Which is partly why I'm convinced it's going to happen. And this first episode sort of spoils the end of the series. Any first episode of anything where the main premise of the episode is the main character saying their "I want" song, basically, it spoils the rest of the show, right? Because the rest of the show, because I mean, Luffy is our main character. If he doesn't become King of the Pirates, what was the point of the journey? Now, in many ways, the journey is its own reward and whatnot, and we'll see that play into Luffy's character later. You're going to hear me say this plays into something later a lot. Uh, but at the same time, I don't think that's. I think that would be an unsatisfactory conclusion to the arc of One Piece. And so basically, Luffy stands up for Kobe when Kobe decides he's going to stand up for himself, even if he's going to die. And we get in that moment that moment where it snaps with us that Luffy is childish, is silly, is brash, is bold, is unapologetic, but at the same time isn't stupid and is incredibly in tune with other people's emotions. Because when Kobe, staring death in the face, stands up for himself, it's all Luffy needs to decide that he doesn't hate Kobe. He might hate the way Kobe acts, and he might hate how much of a coward he is. But in that moment, Kobe showed real stupidity and a stupid bravery that Luffy can respect. So Luffy considers him a friend and is willing to die for him, or kill for him in this case. Not that any of Velveeta's crew ends up getting killed by Luffy. We are then introduced to the concept of devil fruits and Luffy's gum gum powers. Cause he, yo ho ho, he's made of rubber. And he promptly beats Alvida and takes off on a little dinghy with Kobe just as the Marines show up. And that's the first episode. It has some beautiful setup with Nami and the future of the crew and her interactions with Luffy in the background, and it really hints that she's going to be a major player without ever needing to even like give her a line of dialogue in the first episode. I don't think. She does kick a man in the gonads, but like that was more slapstick comedy than anything important. And then that takes us to episode 2, which is probably much more important. Um, and that is a very good hint about Luffy's reason for needing a crew. Um, as we open with Kobe directing the ship to the next island, uh, because Luffy heard that from Kobe that the pirate hunter Zoro may be on the island, who's supposedly this extremely strong person, and Luffy, wanting a crew of people, uh, wants to find strong people to be his crewmates. But there is this moment where Kobe is directing the ship and just explaining like basic navigation to Luffy, and he just laughs it off and acts like Kobe's a genius. And it's really, really honing in on a thing that will come up much later and not so later. That Oda wanted to hammer home is that Luffy, our main character, is woefully inequipped to do what he wants to do. He's strong. We know Luffy is strong. He's brave, he's fearless, and he has the will and dedication to do whatever he has um, to earn that title at the end of the day. But he also just lacks the ability to achieve it. Luffy would never have been able to make it to the next island without Kobe. He needs Kobe. And it's this idea that Luffy needs other people. It's not just that he wants a crew, it's that he absolutely needs them to achieve his goal because he is incapable of doing it on his own. We'll see this come back later in very important moments throughout the story, and it's a really great deconstruction of Luffy's character. And many of the villains in One Piece, who at the end of the day uh, believe that they can do whatever they need to do on their own, either because they were betrayed or because all of their comrades were defeated, or whatever reason, Oda really loves to lean into this and say, and it's a very shonen-esque trope, but like the Nakama syndrome, where friendship will win out in the end. But One Piece does that in a way that subverts the genre, I feel, in many ways. Unlike something like Fairy Tail, which really leans into it being the end-all be-all, sometimes the friendship in One Piece isn't enough, but the friendship is still needed. We also get a little bit about Zoro's reputation as this demon slayer. And then we meet Zoro, um, crucified in front of a naval base and starving to death. And that's when we're introduced to Helmeppo, a blonde crybaby. Again, a very easy character to immediately hate, like Kobe. Which is important for later because he and Kobe are going to spend a lot of time together throughout the rest of the series. Even though his character kind of never really develops past a certain point, unlike Kobe, who actually gets to do some things. Um, Helmeppo does come back later. He does get to do more, but he's still sort of a relegated side character, whereas Kobe becomes sort of the main focus of that para. Um, and then we're introduced to our villain, who is extremely simple. Um, in Axe Hand Morgan. Um, and that is very much something Oda, I think, did on purpose. Um, the villains we meet in the East Blue Saga are, for the most part, very clearly evil in their own way. Or at least they're villains for an obvious reason. Axe-Hand Morgan is just a tyrant, and it's also a great way for Oda to introduce to us the fact that the Marines, the heroes, because we haven't really interacted or heard of the Marines so far other than Kobe wanting to be one in the first episode. This is a great way to introduce us to the Marines because, one, it makes us dislike them. Like, yeah, we're already going to be on Luffy's side no matter what. He's our main character. We love the Luffy boy. but it's so much easier to be on the hand of someone who might do illegal or bad things sometime if our first introduction to the cops of this world is like, oh, so they're like cops in our world. They're bad. Sorry for anyone watching who has big opinions about cops, but guess what? We should probably abolish the police. And it's just one of these huge things where introducing us to the Marines for the first time through Morgan, the first major villain in this show, because we're not going to consider Elvita a major anything except annoyance. Um, and I mean, honestly, Morgan isn't a villain either. I mean, he's a villain, but he's not like a villain, you know? The fact, though, that our primary antagonist for the first 2 episode storyline is a Marine who has taken control of a small little backwater island and is just doing whatever he wants to the people there is great because it shows us one that the Marines are so compartmentalized that the good Marines aren't stopping this and that the people who are there feel too weak to do anything. Um, and it's a really good setup for the future. Now, here we also meet Zoro, who is a goat, of course. He is fantastic, and we're sort of introduced to a piece of Zoro's character, which I almost want to call his naivety. Now this sort of grows out of Zoro as the series continues, but there are some key moments where, if I can remember it, I want to reference back to this first episode. But basically, the crux of it is Helmeppo, Morgan's son, is going around torturing the citizens with his rabid feral wolfhound dog thingies. And one is getting too close to a child, and Zoro cuts it down. Uh, because what person wouldn't cut down a rabid dog cornering a child? Um, and I mean, Zoro could have easily overpowered everyone on this military base, but that's not really his style. He cut the dog because the dog was annoying and threatening someone, and he wasn't about to let the dog do that. And Helmeppo was about to turn the whole Navy base on him, and Zoro didn't necessarily want to kill an entire naval base. So Helmeppo offered him a terms. If he could survive 1 month without food, he'll let him go. Without, doing anything to the people there. Because he was going to originally, I believe, execute the little girl and his mother, or at least torture them or beat them up somehow, uh, because of Zoro's interference. And Zoro gave him one shot, basically. Zoro agreed to this. Now, you might imagine from just seeing sorry, had a momentary brain fart there. From seeing Helmeppo's character, there's probably no way he would ever keep his word. But there is a sort of proclivity in this to introduce us to Zoro's belief in honor and people doing what they say they're going to do. Now Zoro, I will say, sort of grows out of this later in the series to an extent, but he is one of the members of the Straw Hats most willing, I feel, to give someone an out if he thinks he has them. Of course, Helmeppo plans to execute him the next day after 3 weeks had passed, and there was an incident with a little child who he had saved, feeding him some rice balls, which were made with sugar instead of salt, and it's a whole thing where Helmeppo stomps him into the ground, and then has a soldier yeet the child over a wall, and she gets air. Like, that kid must weigh almost nothing, and that Marine is tough. Because, like, I work with kids all day, man, and I can pick them up and I can toss them around, but I can't just, like, chuck a child, like, 15 feet in the air and, like, 50 yards across. Like, nah, man, that boy was. I need a cup of that man's urine for reasons. And then I want to test him for drugs. um, so through all of this, we have our interactions with our main characters, where Luffy very clearly is trying to get a feel for Zoro's character, and decides he likes him when Zoro demands Luffy feed him the ruined onigiri that was trampled into the ground, and asks him to tell the girl it was delicious. Because at the end of the day, Zoro is a good person. He's just a little twisted. Um, And that's when Luffy really notices Zoro's character and decides this is my boy. I'm going to have him and no one else can. Um and Zoro isn't on that level yet until later. Um so there is a moment where uh, Luffy comes back and said he's going to recruit Zoro. He's going to get Zoro's swords back for him so that Zoro will have to join his crew, and then Luffy goes off to the military base. At which point, Kobe shows up and starts trying to cut Zoro loose, being terrible at it, but it's Kobe. What could you expect? And Zoro asks, like, what's going on? Like, why is this happening? And Kobe explains to him that Luffy heard Helmeppo talk about how they were going to execute him the next day, and how they had no intention of ever fulfilling their promise, and how Luffy was so incensed with rage that Helmeppo would break his word to Zoro that he beat him up and basically assaulted the Marine base. And it's at this moment where Zoro's like, oh, this guy would do anything for someone he feels is being wronged in the moment. And it's really good. And there is this like single frame after Kobe tells Zoro why Luffy is doing this, where he just like the camera lingers on him and Kobe, and he's just looking towards the military base where Luffy is gone. And in his head, at that moment, I believe Zoro has decided to fight with Luffy no matter what. He doesn't agree to it until the next part, but that is I think the moment where Zoro really signs on to the crew, and Luffy's not even there. That brings us to episode 3, which introduces us firsthand to Axe Hand Morgan in more detail as he's having the soldiers raise a statue of himself because he is great. Um, and this gets into Oda's love of developing these side characters and tangential villains uh, to be more than just the one moment they are in One Piece. Because while we watch this episode, Morgan doesn't have a personality. He's just a tyrant. He's just the worst. Um, but as we move forward with the series, we'll see more of how this happened. And it's very interesting how Oda loves to use these characters. Now, there was a moment here that I never noticed until this rewatch of this show. And I want to point out that I have watched probably 6,000 episodes of One Piece. I would watch it once every year throughout university, and after university, I would start from episode 1 again and I would watch to whatever the series was current. Normally, whenever I fell a few episodes behind, like a month or two, and I'd be like, you know what, I'm just going to start over and catch up. But there is a moment where Zoro calls Luffy the son of the devil, and I never noticed that, but that is an extremely weird piece of hyperly specific foreshadowing that Oda is just chef's kiss, Oda. And it's fantastic. Luffy and Zoro are an amazing team. They work together. They defeat Morgan handedly. Like it's not even a fight. Like he is nothing compared to the strength of these two men. Um the rest of the Marines cheer and are happy as all can be. And then we get to the moment where Zoro and Luffy are eating at the restaurant of the little girl whose mother, the whole dog thing. And there is a brilliant moment that I wanted to point out here where Kobe is impassionately talking, and he refers to Luffy as his friend, but has to stop himself and ask if they're friends. And I think that's a really good moment of Kobe's character. And it's just the smallest window into the future of Kobe that's very good. Because, I mean, Luffy, since the moment Kobe had stood up for himself on that ship, Luffy was probably ready to ride or die with Kobe no matter what. Because that's just the way Luffy is as a person. Kobe stood up for himself, even in the face of death, and that's all you need to do, besides being a relatively good person, to win Luffy over as your friend. And Luffy probably has considered Kobe his friend since that moment, or even maybe a little before, because Luffy's a little crazy. Um, but the fact that Kobe needs to ask, and it was such a subtle thing that I don't think I'd ever noticed before, because I probably just wasn't paying as much attention because it's Kobe. But I love that he asks Luffy if they're friends. He doesn't just assume it. He doesn't bravely declare it. He has to ask. He's like, "We're friends, right?" Like, and it's great. And then we get the Marines showing up and being like, "Hey, listen, we're super grateful for what you did, but you're still a pirate and you did just attack a Navy officer. He may be a dirtbag, but he's a Navy officer. You need to leave. Like, we can't let you just stay here. We're sorry, but you have to leave." Which the townsfolk aren't happy about. Like, this is another very long running thing where Luffy and his crew end up doing the thing that the Marines should be doing, but the Marines feel they can't because of their restrictions as Marines to their own code of order and whatnot. And this is the first time I think we really get a glimpse of Luffy being brilliant. And the fact that he's a lot smarter than he lets on in a very specific way. It's this part of the episode where we learning about how Luffy, when it comes to people, is incredibly intuitive. As they're leaving, and the Marine is accusing Kobe of being their friend, of being a pirate. And Luffy knows Kobe wants to be a Marine, and Luffy knows they're not going to let him be a Marine if he's friends with a pirate. So Luffy incites Kobe into attacking him and beats him up a little bit, roughs him up a little bit, makes it look a little real to assure the Marines that Kobe is not his friend. And it's this brilliant moment of just Luffy having more social awareness than we would have ever given this character credit. And I don't think it's a breaking character. I think Luffy is just a genius of knowing the right thing to do in a social situation. And it's like super weird how hyper specific he is at knowing exactly what needs to be done. Like, yeah, you might call that a bit of a character break, but I think Oda really uses it enough over the course of the series that it's just a character trait, honestly. And the last thing I want to mention for episode 3, as Luffy and Zoro leave, besides the whole naval base saluting them, uh, and accepting Kobe in as a as a cleaning boy, um, is the moment on the boat, the dinghy, where Zoro is talking to Luffy, and he's asking him about why he wants to be king of the pirates. And there's a moment where Luffy just says that he made a promise to a man that he would be king of he would gather a great crew, he would sail the world and become king of the pirates. And there is such a real moment for Zoro in this instance to just like accept that. And it's really cute to see the two of them bonding cuz Zoro 100% understands that. And we got hints towards that in this episode while Zoro was starving to death and flashbacks to something that we will learn more about him later. Uh, but Zoro very much understands the belief, the reasoning, and the will that a promise can mean for a man. And it further, I think, cements his decision to be Luffy's crewmate. And it's just great because, over the course of the story, like, sometimes the bonding moments of the Straw Hats kind of get lost because the story has to move at a certain pace. So there's a lot of time where we never get to see the crew, like, interacting like family, but they treat each other like family kind of deal. But this is one of those moments where Zoro and Luffy have a moment, and it's really good. And that brings us to episode 4, which I've titled in my notes Flashback Land. There was also some more Nami set up in that chapter, that episode, and there is more Nami set up in this one. She's been sort of foreshadowing the whole thing along at the same time. Uh, this episode marks the first instance of Zoro getting lost, which will become a thing in not necessarily a great way, as I feel it sort of flanderizes his character a little bit. Uh, but the fact that it opens with Zoro getting lost also just shows that he and Luffy need someone. If they still had Kobe aboard their ship, they probably wouldn't be lost because Kobe knows what he's doing. Zoro and Luffy have no idea what they're doing and therefore they get lost. This episode also introduces us to Shanks and Luffy's promise and the Straw Hat's origin, which is fantastic. And a whole slew of ways, as Shanks is a very important character to the series later. We also are introduced to a whole slew of background characters that will become important in their own right. Most notably, I think, in my opinion, is probably Yasop, um, who mentions that he has a son about Luffy's age, which will become relevant in like 8 episodes, maybe, or less, I think. Uh, Almost definitely yes, because Sanji wasn't with the crew at that point. So yeah, I think probably within 8 episodes that'll become a relevant topic. Um, it introduces a few other key things this whole episode where Luffy basically it's a flashback about his promise triggered by the hat getting out of his hand. Um, and it introduces us to Shanks and the Red Hair Pirate crew. It introduces us to Yasop. It introduces the concept of mountain bandits, which I didn't realize was super important, but the fact that Luffy's island has mountain bandits is actually super important. It also introduces a belief system into Luffy beyond his promise um, to Shanks that he would become a great pirate captain, because Shanks is very much like a father figure to Luffy, even though I figure he is also barely around, which is sadly still more than Luffy's father, but we'll deal with Luffy's father eventually. But the fact that Shanks in this moment teaches Luffy that if someone's going to insult you, throw food at you, spit on you, it doesn't matter. Like what does that do? That it doesn't do anything to you. It's not stopping your goals. It's not getting in your way. It's probably just someone who's afraid or stupid venting fear and anger at you. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't cost anything. And there's no reason to shed blood over someone just being stupid. And it's a great piece of Shank's personality that we see as the mountain bandits shatter booze all over him and push him to the ground. But he doesn't defend himself. He just laughs it off. And as we'll find out, Shanks could have definitely defended himself. But the bandits weren't actually a threat, and there's no reason to murder a bunch of people just because they're stupid. And it's a great moment that honestly I wish came up more over the course of the series, because Luffy does over the course of this episode internalize that lesson, even if at this moment he doesn't understand it and actively thinks Shanks is like uncool for doing this. But it really leads into Luffy's character during one specific part later, about episode like 160, I want to say. So I mean, we'll get there one day. Uh, it might be around episode 160. It might be earlier than that. It might be like 120, 130. Uh, I think it's definitely past episode 100 though. But we'll get into that moment later. I just wish that that moment and that moment that you reference later comes up a bit more. But really, it just can't happen too often because Luffy is always in like life or death situations. There's not enough time for those small things to happen anymore. We also see the origin of Luffy's devil fruit, which he eats off a chest at the table when he's not really paying attention to what he's doing. He's just grabbing food and eating it. Um, and we learn about devil fruits a little bit more. We learn about him turning into rubber. We learn about it taking away his ability to swim. Uh, we also got a bit of a hint towards something that's like super subtle. But I believe they do mention that they took the devil fruit from an enemy ship, um, which will become relevant later. And I can almost guarantee almost none of us thought that would ever be relevant. But it did because Oda just is an absolute madman sometimes. But over the course of this episode, that's mostly a flashback. There are only a few other things that happen. Um, the Mountain Bandits show up again later and begin bad mouthing Shanks when he's not around to defend himself. Not that he would, because they're just idiots. Luffy, however, still hasn't fully internalized Shanks' lesson about not caring about that kind of shit. So Luffy tries to defend Shanks because he doesn't like his friend being insulted. So he tries to beat up the bandits, and that goes, as you would imagine, poorly. At which point, Shanks shows up with the crew. And there's a moment where the bandits try to basically hold Luffy hostage and put a gun on Shanks' head. And that's the first time we get a real glimpse at what a real pirate is like. Because we had Elvira, and we knew she was mean and kind of brutish, but she was just as much of a tyrant as Morgan. This is a pirate, though. There's a moment where a man puts a gun to Shank's head, and Shanks goes, "Hey, that's not for threatening people." And the bandit goes, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "If you point a gun at someone, you kill them. You don't use this thing to threaten someone." And then that character gets shot in the head because the pirates don't fuck around. And it's also a really good glimpse into Shanks' character. He's never going to pull his sword on you to threaten you. He's never going to pull a gun on you to threaten you. Those aren't tools for threatening. They are tools of war. They are tools of murder. They are tools of death. If he's going to threaten you, he'll do it to your face with his face. And it's just a great glimpse into his character and his belief that, like, that isn't a toy. If you're going to point that at me, your life is on the line because that is a lethal weapon and I will kill you. And it's fantastic. And then the guy dies. And the bandits are like, "Hey, you're fighting dirty." And the pirates are like, "We're pirates." So the bandits charge. Um, they get absolutely manhandled by a single member of Shanks' crew without breaking a sweat. I believe it's Ben Beckham. Ben Beckman. My knowledge of Shanks' crew is not as adept as many people who've watched as much One Piece as me, but because they're in the series so rarely, I've never really bothered to look into them very much. But I believe it's Ben Beckman, and he just beats the crap out of them. The Mountain Bandit is terrified because he realizes these people are not even near his league. Uh, and at this point, he's like, I'm the big bad. You can't do this." And Shanks is just like, "You're a wanted man, right? No one's gonna care what we do to you." And he's like, "Ah, shit." So he runs away, dragging Luffy with him. And there's this moment where we see the other sides of Shanks, which is that blind overconfidence leads to him dropping his guard against people he considers lesser than him. And he's right. That bandit is so far beneath him, his guard doesn't need to be up. But Luffy was involved. A child was involved. And it shows that Shanks has that disconnect between what is a threat and what isn't a threat because of how strong he is. Um, Now, the bandit runs off to sea, assuming the pirates have never believed the mountain bandit would get in a dinghy and sail away. However, this island is surrounded by a large sea monster who shows up and eats the mountain bandit and destroys the dinghy and sends Luffy into the water. But Luffy has a devil fruit now, which means he can't swim. So he's paddling desperately, trying to stay up, and then Shanks shows up at the last moment and grabs him and pulls him out of the way of the monster. Um, in the process, losing his arm as the monster clams down on where Luffy was, and what is there at that time is Shanks's right right arm. I think it's his right arm from how the image looks in my head. It might be his left arm. Hold up, let's look up a picture of Shanks. One Piece, because in my head it's his right arm, but now that I've said it, I think it's his left arm. It is his left arm. Okay, okay. I was like, in my head, I know I'm messing this up, so I better double check it. So he loses his left arm to save Luffy. Um, and now we get another excellent piece of foreshadowing to something that you'll find later. I'm not going to spoil too much about it. It's called Conqueror's Hockey. At the time, I don't think Oda knew what he was writing. I'm not going to lie, because he doesn't really expand on this ability till way later, like past episode 350. He doesn't really expand on what this is in detail. So I think at the time he just wanted to show that Shanks is incredibly powerful. But he did it in such a vague way that he could use it later. Where Shanks basically stares down the sea monster, this enraged tyrant lizard creature, and is just like, "Get out of here." And it runs away. Like, and that's supposed to really clue in, like, yeah, they were better than the Mountain Bandit, sure, but they were kind of crap, right? But no, this is a giant sea monster, and it's afraid of Shanks. I'm still not wholly convinced he needed to lose an arm. I'm pretty positive Shanks is probably strong enough that he would have been able to not lose his arm. I don't know. Oda does some weird things with Shanks sometimes where he just does dumb shit and like bad stuff happens around him and he could have been prevented. But you know what? It happened. It's a big part of what happens later with Shanks, so it's fine. So Luffy saves Shanks. Shanks and his crew get ready to leave. Luffy is still sad that they won't take him with him because he's a little kid. And it's at this point he makes the promise to get a crew and become king of the pirates and become someone who Shanks could consider an equal. Shanks gives him the hat, which is a huge thing. Uh, and then leaves. And then we pull out a flashback land. Luffy gets his hat back. Him and Zoro are hungry. He tries to punch a bird out of the sky. He ends up getting caught in the bird's mouth. Hilarity ensues. Zoro speeds after him, trying to catch up. He almost runs over three people who Nami stole a boat from earlier, laden with loot. They get in the boat and start, getting ready to kill Zoro and steal his boat, which doesn't go well for them because he is much stronger than they are. And this is where we get introduced to the next major villain, who I believe is the villain for like the next 3 episodes, I want to say, which is Buggy the Clown. And we'll get to him later because he comes up a lot for many reasons. But yeah, that is our recap of the first 4 episodes of One Piece. Now, I do want to mention something that doesn't come up in the anime, but comes up in the manga immediately. The first volume of the manga is titled Romance Dawn. Um, and I'm kind of sad that they didn't use that for the flashback episode. I'm sad they didn't use that as the title for the first episode. But the title for the first episode being Luffy saying he's going to be king of the pirates is probably poetic enough. But as someone who has studied literature and has a degree in literature, One Piece is a fascinating story for a lot of reasons. But one of them is that it's probably the best modern representation of the romantic quest. And Oda knows his stuff. Like, the fact that he calls the first volume Romance Dawn is not just a random choice. It's not just because it's the beginning of the story, therefore it's the dawn. The whole idea of the One Piece is a romantic idea. It is an idea of romance. It is something that is so unobtainable, nobody really knows whether or not it's real, but people are willing to die, hunt, and kill for it. All over the world. This thing they don't even know exists. It's the romantic essence distilled into a pirate theme smattered with comedy. It is the Holy Grail. It is the quest for the Holy Grail. And it's so interesting that Oda took the quest for the Holy Grail and made it a silly story about pirates, and it doesn't suck. Like, Oda is really, really good. And, like, yeah, I mean, we all know this, and people will talk about how good Oda is. But, man, sometimes I think we just all need to sit down and really just appreciate that this man has written a cohesive story for 20 years of almost non-stop weekly updates, and it's all about romance. Which, honestly, I feel in a postmodernist sort of era that we all exist in, where nihilism is rampant and everyone is depressed and life kinda sucks all the time for most people. The idea that Oda can have this and it's so popular and it's so good is so important, I think, to the human condition. And just the idea of romance. And I love it. I'm a romantic at heart. What can I say? But all right, thank you. This has been our first recap of One Piece, the first 4 episodes. Hopefully, I didn't spoil too many things. I don't want to go in like scene by scene what happens in each episode. I'm really just going over like the big beats and things I think are interesting or things that I know call back to later episodes and whatnot, and just want to sort of dissect it as we go along. This isn't a review series. I don't know what to call it. I'm gonna call it a recap, but I think it's somewhere in between that. If I was going to review these episodes, I definitely think the first episode is the weakest. The second episode with Xan Morgan's probably the second strongest. Uh, and then I think the flashback episode, or the third episode with Xan Morgan's the second strongest. The first episode and the second episode probably take up the bottom end of these four, and then the flashback episode is probably at the top for just character development and just story development. But I'm not gonna get too strict on rating these, and I might never do that again. We'll see how I do the next time I do one of these, hopefully within a week or so. Thank you, everyone. If you have your own opinions about Oda's writing and the story of One Piece, please leave them down below. In any capacity at all. I'm an absolute huge fan of this series. I have been forever, and I love talking One Piece with people. And sadly, I live sort of isolated in Japan right now. So the more people I have to talk to about One Piece, the better I'll be at life. Thank you. Goodbye now.